If you are in debt right now, you are in the financial equivalent of quicksand. It might not feel that dangerous right now, but it is way too easy to get trapped in a cycle of debt that you can never escape from. So in this video, I'm going to explain the mathematically fastest way to get out of debt, how to save more money to get out of debt faster, and how to make sure that you never go into debt again. But first, let me explain why you need to get out of debt like your life depends on it. Because being in debt is kind of like riding a bicycle. If you're starting with $0, you're just on flat ground. You're not going anywhere right now. But once you start saving money, then you start pedaling and you start moving forward. You won't be going very fast, but at least you're going somewhere. And ideally, as you start saving more money, you could start investing. This gives you more momentum and you start going even faster. Because when you invest, you can make money without doing anything. And that's why investing is like riding a bike downhill. You could stop pedaling and you would still be moving. And not only would you still be moving, you'd actually still be getting even faster. Your money would continue to grow and compound and make you even wealthier with time, even if you weren't saving any more money, aka pedaling. But debt is the exact opposite. When you're in debt, those interest payments slow you down. And this is why being in debt is like riding uphill. You can still make progress, you just have to pedal harder, because your savings, which could have moved you farther, are now paying off those interest payments. So you're not going the same distance for the same amount of savings. But as you go into more and more debt, the hill gets steeper and steeper. Pretty soon, you have to put in all of the effort you have just to stay in the same place. And if you stop pedaling for just a second, then you start to go backwards. You will lose any progress that you've made, and you'll go into more and more debt. And let me put some numbers behind this just to make this more real. A couple of years ago, one of my best friends bought a $29,000 car with an 11% loan. That means that in his first year, he had to pay $3,190 just in interest payments. And that's just to avoid going into even more debt. So he could be paying that $3,200 in interest payments every year for the rest of his life. And he would still be in $29,000 of debt. To actually pay off that principal of $29,000, he'll have to save up even more money. And $3,000 per year is already a lot for this friend of mine. He's making progress and he'll pay it off eventually, but it's going to take years. But if he stopped paying the interest, then that $29,000 of debt would turn into $32,190 of debt, and then $35,731, and then almost $40,000 of debt. After just 10 years, that $29,000 of debt would have grown into $82,343 of debt, and his annual interest payment would be over $9,000 per year. He would have no way to escape. So this is how debt can completely ruin lives. So let me explain how to get out of debt as fast as possible. Let's say that you have 3 different debts, and each of these debts are for the same value of $1,000. This is the principal value. But each of these debts have a different interest rate. So one of these debts has 25% interest, another of them has 15% interest, and the third has 5% interest. So combined, that means you need to pay $450 just in interest on these 3 debts. Now let's say that you have $1,000 to pay off debts. So after the interest payments hit, you have $550 which you can use to reduce the debt of any of these 3 loans. So let's say you choose to pay off the 5% loan. After you pay the interest, you have $550 to reduce that loan. So that loan goes down to $450. The other loans go up though. One goes up to $1,250 and the other goes up to $1,150. So in the next period, your total interest would now be $507.50. And this is really bad news. Even though you reduced one of your loans from $1,000 to just $450, your total interest payments have gone from $450 to $507. That is a very bad sign. You do not want to be paying even more interest as time goes on. So what if, instead of paying off the 5% loan, you paid off the 25% loan? So again, after paying off the $450 of interest payments, you have $550 left over to apply to that loan, and you take it down to $450. Of course, your other loans will still go up. One will go up to $11.50, the other will go up to $10.50. So now, in the next pay period, you'll owe $335 of interest. That is a lot better. Your interest payment went from $450 down to $335. Just by using your money to pay off the highest interest debt first, you're going to save over $150 just in the next pay period on your interest payments. And in the next period, you'll be able to completely pay off your highest interest loan. And this is why, if you want to get out of debt as fast as physically possible, what you should do is pay off the loan that has the highest interest payment. It doesn't matter whether that loan with the highest interest payment is your largest debt or not. No matter what, you'll reduce your interest payments the most by paying off the loans with the highest interest rate. And by spending less money on interest, you'll have more money to apply to debt, and you'll get out of debt faster. And as soon as you pay off your debt with the highest interest rate, then start paying off the debt with the next highest interest rate. You just keep doing this until you're completely out of debt. Every single pay period, you should see the amount of your money that's going towards interest going down and down and down, and more of your money going to the principal values so that you're slowly getting out of debt. If you don't see the principal value change at all, then that means that you're only paying off interest and you're not any closer to being out of debt. And if you see the interest payments go up, that means you're going into even more debt, and that should be a huge red flag. And this is also why that paying off debt is basically the same thing as an investment, except with investing, you're going from $0 and then you're building wealth on top of that. Whereas when you pay off debt, you're starting at a negative value and you're trying to get back to zero. But paying off debt with a 10% interest rate is basically the same thing as investing in an asset with a guaranteed 10% return. By paying off that debt, you're saving money in the future that would have had to go to those interest payments. And what's great about paying off debt is that rate of return is pretty much guaranteed. If you pay off debt that charges you 10% per year, then you know you are saving money on the interest payments that you now no longer have to make. There are a lot of debts that charge 10% interest or even higher, but there is no investment asset that is going to guarantee you a return of 10% or more. So if you're in debt, paying off your debt is pretty much the best investment that you can ever make. So you know which debt to pay off and how to get out of debt as fast as possible. But to get out of debt, you have to be saving money. So let me walk you through 5 key strategies that you can use to get out of debt fast. And the first is to just make sure that you know what the heck you're paying for. I make everyone I work with track their expenses because there is nothing that makes you feel more dumb than paying for stuff that you didn't even realize that you were spending money on. So if you don't track your expenses right now, then start. There's a budgeting template in the description that you can download and use for free. There is absolutely no excuse to not be tracking your expenses. But in the meantime, go and check all of your credit card and your bank statements and look through all of those expenses and make sure that you can explain every single one of them. It is very possible that there's a debt in there that you forgot that you're paying interest on, or a subscription that you don't even need but that you're still auto-subscribed to. And for every debt that you are paying on, make sure you figure out the interest rate on that debt so you can prioritize which debts to pay off first. Second, I need you to make a mindset shift. If you are in debt, you are in a sinking ship. And if you aren't keeping up with interest payments, then more water is coming in than is going out. So being in debt is an emergency, especially if you're going into even more debt. So treat it like an emergency. If you are in debt, you have to fix this as fast as you physically can before it ruins your life. This mindset shift will make it a lot easier to do strategy number 3, which is to treat debt like a necessity. Everyone has some expenses that they really need, and other expenses which they just kind of like to have. If you could only buy one thing, you would probably choose food. Transportation so you can get to a work site might also be a necessity. And after that, once you're fed and are able to transport yourself, you'd probably choose a place to live so you have a permanent place to sleep. But these are really the only 3 things that you absolutely need. Everything else, from new clothes to haircuts to a TV subscription, are all just sort of nice to haves. And if you buy all of the things which are just nice to haves, then it is very easy to spend all of your money. So if you buy all of the things that you want before you worry about paying off your debt, then you're never going to get out of debt. You have to treat debt like it's a necessity. So what I would do is cancel literally every other expense which is not one of the necessities until I am out of debt. It is that serious. And that also means that if your income increases, you do not increase your expenses until you are out of debt first. Because again, you should be putting every single dollar that you don't absolutely need towards getting out of debt. So if you earn more money, that just means you have more money to put towards your debt, so you get out of debt even faster. And this also means that you shouldn't even be investing. Getting out of debt is an even higher priority. I've met multiple people who have said that they're in debt, so they've been investing to try to save more money and build more wealth so they can get out of debt even faster. But the stock market only returns about 6 to 7% per year, and even that is highly unpredictable. And sure, there are some years where the stock market goes up by a lot, but there are other years where it goes down. So not only would you be in the same amount of debt as you were before, or actually even more since the interest payments have accumulated, you also have even less money. That is not a good situation to be in. But when you pay off debt, you are guaranteed a rate of return of that interest rate. So remember my friend who was paying 11% interest on his car loan. An 11% guaranteed rate of return is actually extremely good. So if I had any extra money, I would want to put that money towards getting an 11% return for me. That's a great return. There was no way I would take my money and put it in the stock market for an unpredictable 6 to 7% instead of putting that money and getting a guaranteed rate of return of 11% first. Only after that debt is completely paid off and I can't put any more money towards getting that guaranteed 11% return is when I would finally consider investing in the stock market instead. And I even had one friend who was trying to invest in the stock market even though he was still in credit card debt. Why would you try to get 10% in the stock market when you're paying 30% on your credit card debt? Just pay off the debt first. In a lot of cases, paying off your debt is the best return that you're ever going to get, especially because it's guaranteed rate of return. But there is an exception to this. There are some cases where it makes sense to stay in debt for as long as possible. But this only happens when you have very low interest debt. You might have a very large mortgage, but you're paying such a low interest payment that it can make a lot of sense to do other things with your money rather than pay off that debt as fast as possible. You could get a guaranteed rate of return of 3%, but you could probably do better by doing something else. In that case, you probably could get a better return by investing in the stock market. Although again, nothing is guaranteed. And at this point, it's really just a mental thing. Some people just hate being in debt, which I totally understand. So if you really don't like the sense of being in debt, then it can still make sense to pay off this debt as fast as possible. But if you are willing to take a little more risk, then from a mathematical point of view, it could make sense to try to stay in debt for as long as possible and only make the minimum payment. In general, this really only applies to things like a mortgage, and even then, kind of depends on when you bought. The vast majority of loans, like car loans and credit card loans, almost always make sense to pay off as fast as you possibly can. There is no reason to gamble your money in the stock market trying to earn a higher rate of return when you can get such a great return just by paying off your debt first. But once you're out of debt, it's important to stay out of it. So here's what I recommend so that you never go into debt again. First up, you should build a cushion. You don't want your first unexpected expense to put you into debt. You know that unexpected expenses will happen. You just don't know when or what they'll be. You should make sure that you already have some savings which can absorb these inevitable surprises. And this might seem sort of logical, but 37% of Americans said that an unexpected $400 expense would put them into debt. You should absolutely have more of a cushion than that. The second thing you want to do is automate paying off your debt. Like the vast majority of people, I have a credit card. And I use this credit card to make almost all of my payments. But I have never once paid a single dollar of interest because I've set it up so that I automatically pay off all of my expenses at the end of every single month. This makes it pretty much impossible for me to ever go into debt. You should absolutely try to automate your payments on any other debt just to make sure that those interest payments don't start to snowball without you even realizing. And if you're trying to get out of debt, you can also use this strategy. you can start automating your payments just to make sure that your money is automatically going to pay off that debt rather than getting spent when you forget about it. And third, try to make saving your new normal. We already talked about treating debt like a necessity, where you pay off your debt before buying anything else that you don't really need. But after you're out of debt, you can keep doing the same thing. Except instead of saving that money to pay off debt, you can just be saving that money in order to save it. Saving that money and building wealth becomes your new priority, just as important as getting out of debt. Because saving money gives you financial freedom. That seems pretty darn important, but so many people treat it like an afterthought, and they only save money after they've already bought everything else that they want. If you build in buying your financial freedom into your budget, it's going to be a lot easier to save money and reach financial freedom. And once you are saving money, then you want to get that money invested so that you can harness the power of compound interest rather than having compound interest suck you into more and more debt. Because investing is an incredibly powerful tool which you can use to retire decades faster than you would otherwise be able to. But a lot of people just don't know how to get started. So I made this video right here to explain how to get started investing in order to reach financial freedom.